there was a time where things started clicking like that. I think the first year for me was a big transition for me personally because it was the death of the old guy, right? It was I wasn't necessarily with the happy with the person that I was that led up to that moment where everything changed for me. And so I knew that I had to change some things about myself. I couldn't even think about work for the first year. It was more just a personal evolution of becoming the man that I always wanted to be and the man that I always knew that I could be. And once I started on the path and then the itch came back for work, that's when things started firing.
I'm going to be able to pronounce your name, George. It's George Andriopoulos.
That's right.
And actually, a friend of mine was on my podcast the other day. He's the founder of an amazing international mentoring platform that I'm part of. And there's no way I could pronounce his Greek name. I tried so many times. But this was it. This was it because my college roommate and still my good friend, Dennis Zakaropoulos, taught me well. There you go. George, we actually met a month ago just to get to know each other. And we have so much in common that I didn't really spend too much time studying you because I figured we're just going to have fireside chat about two Long Islanders that have similar roots in entrepreneurship. Rather than ask you to introduce yourself, I want to run through your stuff and go right into it. So you started your career, I guess, in business development for a pharmaceutical company, one or two of those. Then from there, you buy into a concierge business, or I'm going from memory now, about virtual assistants. Then you get the rights to TEDx in Farmingdale, New York, which is your hometown, and you produce TEDx events. Then you start Launchpad 516, which is, I guess, in a generic term, marketing agency, more or less, right? Or am I wrong?
Launchpad 516 is a management consulting firm. So we're basically a business consulting firm. So for growth strategy and, marketing is part of what we do, but it's really growth strategy and consulting.
Got it. And then as you start a new venture, an international platform called Peak, I want to focus our time together on the lesson that you learned from the different stages in your entrepreneurship journey that we can share with people that are listening, watching. And so let me start with what I like to call the decisive moment. Do you remember the moment where you're working for a pharmaceutical company and you decide, no, entrepreneurship is what I want?
Yeah. So it didn't really go like that. I actually started out on the clinical side of pharmacy. I went to St. John's to be a pharmacist. That was my ultimate goal. And then I sort of fell in love with the business side of pharmacy as my career grew. But, it was very early on that I realized that the pharmacy itself didn't excite me, didn't get me going. It was, I had family that did it and family that I looked up to. So I just decided when I was a kid, I want to do that too. And I followed that path and, just tried to follow through on my original dream without realizing, hey, I'm allowed to pivot, right? So I followed through and I went into this career for well over a decade that I just didn't like. Now, during that time period, I learned everything I know today about business and of course I've grown on that knowledge since then, but it gave me the foundation for what I needed to learn about business and business turnaround, business development, and innovation in business and all these things. And I guess realizing that pharmacy itself was not my passion and that I had probably 3 or 4 years into my career I was exposed to management consultants in our industry and I loved what they did. And I said, I want to do that. When I move on to the next phase of my career, I want to do that. And so it wasn't really an aha moment of I'm gonna pivot. It was more life took me in that direction. I had a tumultuous couple of years where personal life was in turmoil. I was in the middle of going through a divorce and I needed to pivot and just get out of the space that I was in. And so I made the conscious decision, I got to just leave work for a little while, focus on my family, and, working on myself as a man. And when that all started to fall into place, that's when I had the itch, I was always an entrepreneur within what I did, but I had the itch. And I always say that I felt like when everything was coming together, I felt like 80% of myself. And the 20% that was missing was the work, the creativity and work, the fun that I have doing what I do.
That's right.
Launchpad was the first thing that happened. I started this management consulting firm, me and a part-time assistant renting 2 desks in somebody else's office. And here we are 11 years plus later, still doing our thing. And this is what gave me the opportunities to delve into other stuff like the concierge thing you mentioned and speak and everything else that I've been involved in.
So it's interesting you mentioned going through a divorce. It's a horrible thing to go through, no matter how you slice it. I went through the same process, and interestingly, um, I don't know if you felt the same way, but my divorce process took a year and a half, and during that year and a half, I absolutely crushed it at work. I was at my best, which might sound counterintuitive, but for me, the only part of my life that I was able to control during the process was my performance and my work. Everything else was in the hands of lawyers and courts. It's life changing in many ways, but for me, I dove into. It's like the problem with divorce is the feeling of helplessness because it gets dragged out for whatever reason. So you need control. You need a way to keep your sanity.
Yeah, there was a time where things started clicking like that. I think the first year for me was a big transition for me personally because it was the death of the old guy, right? It was I wasn't necessarily with the happy with the person that I was that led up to that moment where everything changed for me. And so I knew that I had to change some things about myself. I couldn't even think about work for the first year. It was more just a personal evolution of becoming the man that I always wanted to be and the man that I always knew that I could be. And once I started on the path and then the itch came back for work, that's when things started firing. And yeah, I learned some new things during that year professionally that I had never done before as I was consulting independently, and it gave me more to add to my arsenal for when I started with the company. But yeah, that kind of rebirth, it was like renewal, a rebirth and everything. Once I got back into the space where I could focus on work and I knew everything was good with my kids and my relationships and I was moving forward with life, it was probably one of the most creative times for me. Just starting the business, writing the business plans and P&P and just ideas. I have this bubble chart. It's in my closet behind me in my home office here, but I put together this bubble chart in my dining room table of like all the services that Launchpad 516 would offer, and it's this big massive thing, and it was the roadmap for what I would eventually build. So yeah, it was definitely when I got into that headspace, I
Yeah.
was able to be better than I was before.
So life prepared you for entrepreneurship. So let's dive into entrepreneurship. In one of your short reels, you stare at the camera and you talk directly to entrepreneurs and you say, hey, listen, you're watching me, you want to be an entrepreneur. Don't think you're going to be a Elon Musk, Mark Cuban, Gary Vee. It takes a lot of work to get to that level. So my advice to would-be entrepreneurs, don't go into it unless you worked for somebody else before. That's like my number one advice to people,
Yeah.
because you have to learn how not to do things and you have to learn how to do things right. But there's principles of running a business that apply. So what's your take on that? You stare at the camera and it's like a grab them by the shoulders and shake them up. Talk about that because
Yeah.
you can look back now and say, yeah, of course.
I've been introspective about this for the last couple of years because I'm writing my first book and trying to figure out how to disseminate the things that I've learned along the way without sounding preachy. And one of the things that was wrong with I always talk about act one of my career versus act two. One of the things that was wrong in act one was this sense of entitlement of I was good at what I did. And I worked with people that were really good as well and taught me everything that I know. But there was this sense of entitlement of like, oh, they have this, but I deserve it because I'm just as good. But I didn't realize at the time that I was going through what I needed to go through in order to eventually get to that position, right? I never would have been as good had I just started a business day one and it would have failed and it just wouldn't have been what life turned into now. So yeah, so speaking to that, it's like people have to realize like you have to go through the shit first. You have to go through, you have to work your way up. You have to go through the levels. You have to understand what it feels like to be the low man on the totem pole and to maybe have some ideas, but they're not valued yet because you haven't earned that respect yet. And how to be of service and of value so that eventually you become more invested in the place that you work for, and then eventually getting to the place where you can take that leap, because it is a leap when you're an entrepreneur to say, okay, I'm gonna take this chance. I'm gonna put everything behind me right now. I'm gonna start this business. I'm gonna believe in this idea, and I'm just gonna take a leap. And I pray that everything works,
Yeah.
and of luck and prayer and skill and right place, right time. And, sometimes you could have the best thing in the world and it's just not the right timing. And so I think if you're patient as an entrepreneur, you find the right time. That's probably the biggest piece of advice I'll give to any entrepreneur. Be patient. Your time will come, and pull the trigger when it is the right time.
Yeah, and I would add to it that plenty of people are going to offer you hacks and magic bullets and ways to cut corners. But at the end of the day, as you said, you have to pay your dues by making mistakes and learning from them, right? It doesn't just happen because you're smart. What brought you to public speaking? Because look, it's a skill that's really, really required when you run a business, right? In terms of presentation, be able to connect with people through verbal cues, anything else. What was attractive about public speaking? Because
It was all in due time. Right? I did it as a matter of cause in terms of growing my business. We got to a point where the business had grown a lot and plateaued, and it was kind of like you look at it and go, all right, what do I do next? Right. So if I'm this business guru, right, that's supposed to be able to go in and solve a problem for a business, and okay, well, you look at the other guys at the time, this was like 2014, 2015. You look at the other guys at the time that are the big names, not like me, the huge names, the Gary V's, the Mark Cubans, Marcus Lemonis, the Prophet, all these people. And you go, well, they've put their faces on their brand. It's not just their company anymore. It's this person is the leader of this brand. And now they've become this thought leader that grows their businesses through their brand first. So this was like the very beginning of the whole movement of like branding yourself, like really early on in it. And I said, this is the next evolution. This is how I grow the company. I have to grow the George Andriopoulos name in order to grow the Launchpad 516 name. And so, we went on a campaign of like local awards that I was nominated for and getting on small stages. And it kind of grew from there. And I caught the bug. I liked being on stage. I do like being the center of attention. I like, having a microphone on me and being able to affect people through my words. But it grew past that. And when it became now a matter of, okay, this is part of my career, well, now I do what I do and I have to focus on becoming better at it. I learn from others. I study it. And as I'm studying it and trying to get better at it, now you go, all right, well, how do I earn my way up the ladder? Well, I got to do a TEDx, right? That was the thing. So I did my first one and I didn't love my first one. And so I did my second one and it was better, but I knew I could still get better. And so I wanted to get behind the minds of other speakers, which led to me applying for a license of my own to produce my own TEDx show for two reasons. One was to work with other speakers and be able to, I don't want to say coach them because it wasn't about coaching. I was producing a show, but I had valuable advice for them and I wanted to learn from them as well with their process. And the other part of it was I wanted to bring this thing to my hometown, a big, I'm from Farmingdale, New York on Long Island. I do everything I can to build my community as much as I can. And so to be able to bring something like this to Farmingdale to me was important. And that's how that whole thing started for me. And in the process, a pretty good keynote speaker and made it part of my career.
so I remember when I went on my own in 2012, January 1st, okay, everybody said to me, if you want to be successful, you need to write a book, get on stage and be a speaker. The public speaking stuff is not easy because everybody wants to go on stage. Everybody wants to, especially in small towns where we live. I mean, still Long Island, but there's still relatively, there's a chamber in every town, and maybe you start small. What's your advice to startup founders, people are, 1, 2, 3 years in their journey in the business? The public speaking, you said it's a branding thing, but it's also a credibility aspect, right? If we get on stage, people look at you as you the guru, you the expert, you have something to share because you have achieved a certain milestone. How does a no-name guy get on a stage? Not necessarily TEDx, right? That's the reach.
Yeah. So I'll say a couple of things about it. One is don't get on the stage just to get on a stage, right? It's like it's the same thing with like authoring a book. Like I walked away from a book deal that I had 5 years ago because I didn't want to write a book just to write a book. I wanted to write a book that affected people. So, and I'm still going through that process because I want it to be just right the first time I do it. The same thing with the stage, right? Yes, I got on the stage to increase my company's brand and our visibility, but I quickly understood the responsibility of being on stage, right? Yes, and it gave me that credibility because I got on stage first just to get on stage. And then I realized I want to talk about leadership because that was my niche, that was my specialty. And then beyond that, I've found turnaround. That's the key word for what I do in my business and what I do in public speaking. So I'm the leadership and turnaround guy in speaking. And because I have those specialties, I can get on stage and tell stories that actually help people. Yes, I might get paid to be on stage, but I'm doing it to help people, not just doing it to get paid. I'm not just doing it to increase my visibility and brand. So for those that actually have the right intentions of getting on stage, you got to just start small. Figure out what it is you want to say. Put it together in a cohesive way. Look for counsel from people that have done it before. Have conversations. Reach out to people like me that have been on stages and produced stages. Send out emails. What's the worst that's going to happen? Somebody's not going to respond, right? Learn from them. And then when you have something cohesive to say and you've worked on the mechanics of saying it, go anywhere and do it. Anywhere that will have you. Could be a library in front of 3 people. It could be a chamber of commerce in front of 16 people, and eventually it will grow into a room of 100 people and 1,000 people and 10,000 people if what you do is for the right reasons and you're good at it.
What do you remember a point where you were on stage and it was complete failure? But the moment where you walked off and you said, "Boy, that was hard." So what happened and what did you learn from?
Yeah. I don't think I've ever gotten on stage where it was like, oh man, I want to go like hang myself right now. Like I've never had that because I've always been pretty good at sort of self-correcting on the fly. And, even if something's not going in the right direction, I'll kind of course correct. But I will say my first TEDx talk, I hated when I got off. I liked the talk itself, but there were a number of factors, including my own preparation, that made me not like it. The tech at the event was not great. There were a couple of last minute surprises that affected my performance. I, at the time, was not in the school of thought of write a talk and fully memorize it. And so I was going off of a prompter, which I learned later on is not the right way for me to do it. After the first time I watched it, I couldn't watch it for a couple of years. I just hated it. I felt like a beginner. I felt it didn't reflect who I was. After time, though, and this is a great story, after time, you got to give yourself grace with these growing pains and these sort of evolution moments, in what you do, because I couldn't have become the speaker I am today without that first TEDx talk. Fast forward to when we developed Speak, and I have 2 partners in Speak. One of my partners, Fred, is also a public speaker. So he and I were at the point where we were designing what a Speak talk would look like and sound like. And we came up with the framework of it. And I came up with a great exercise. I said, hey, Fred, he and I met on the TEDx stage at that same talk that I hate. I said, hey, it would be a great exercise? What if we took our TEDx talks that we did, our first ones, and we used the rules of Speak and we turned it into a Speak talk? Just so that we can show people the difference between a TEDx talk and a Speak talk, because they are very different. He said, great idea. I said, okay, I'm going to get to work. So I just turned it on YouTube and I put it in my pocket. And I listened to the talk and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And I realized in that moment that there were a lot of visuals that made me not like this talk, but the content of the talk and what I was trying to put forth was good. I realized in that moment, this is actually a pretty good talk. I was just very hard on myself. I may have felt like I, pooped the bed in that moment when I gave the talk and I got off the stage and I didn't like it. But now, years later, looking at it, you kind of realize the value in storytelling at whatever level you're at.
So what is the differentiating aspect of Speak versus a TEDx?
So TED Talks are ideas worth spreading. So it's an actionable idea, unique actionable idea, and you are talking about this idea in your talk, and it's a presentation versus a story. Speak is the tagline is people with ideas and stories. And so Speak, they're typically storytelling. And a Speak Talk features 3 key moments: the moment of truth, moment of transformation, and moment of impact. That's the roadmap for a Speak Talk, right? That's the story arc of a Speak Talk. And so it's somebody that's just telling an impactful story, like the one I just told you about my original TEDx talk going into a book. And it's just a recounting of a story as affirmed by the speaker themselves. And it features these moments. And it's meant to kind of, teach the listener a lesson of some sorts, the impact of this story in that person's life. So it doesn't have to be something big and grandiose like this unique idea that you came up with to fix something. It's just a story, but if in the moral of that story, we can pull something that will help us, that's a successful Speak Talk.
Got it. So because you're a turnaround guy and you've done it for a while, from your perspective, street smart in the trenches, why do companies have to be turned around? What's the root cause that you've seen that causes them to get to that point? A loaded question. I apologize, but
yeah, great question. No, it's a great question. It's really in 2 parts. There's the leadership, and then there's the ethos of the company, and they are tied together in a way. So, we've all seen the TV shows, right? The business guru that comes in to fix the business, and it turns out that the owner is blaming everybody and their mothers for the failures of the business, but in reality, it was the owner's fault. So if leadership is not fluid and understanding that there are so many levels to why things happen, it's a domino effect of why things happen, and are not ready for change in their company and in their vision, it's going to be a failure. Those types of leaders are the ones that sometimes get companies in a position where there needs to be a turnaround done. The other part of it, the ethos of the company is, and again, this is leadership that built this, but does the company have an ethos and a vision that will allow a company to pivot and not get stuck in the place that got them into a bad place where they have to turn around, right? Because a lot of times a company will start a company starts because they have an idea or a product or a solution that is filling the gap, right? There's some kind of gap in the market that needs to be filled by this product or idea or solution. That gap being filled sometimes is a long-term gap, and sometimes it's a short-term gap that'll lead to something else. And times change. Sometimes those gaps change and they don't even exist anymore. So if you're now creating a solution for a problem that doesn't even exist anymore, what are we even doing here? Right? So a lot of times companies get stuck in this place where they think, no, this is our core business and this is exactly what we have to do for the rest of all time. They have to realize that times change. Like, companies need to pivot. Companies need to evolve more than pivot and grow into solving other problems, filling other gaps, so that there is always a need for this company, right? It's like your personal investment portfolio. You're not going to pick one thing only and invest in that thing and assume this is the thing that's going to, grow your investments for the rest of all time. You have to diversify your portfolio when you're investing. It's the same thing with a business. Once that thing that works gets you to a place where you now have resources, let's look at it. Let's try to make sure that we're solving all the adjacent problems to the original problem that we were trying to solve. Because sometimes that original problem goes away and it's only the adjacent problems that we have left to give us business, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the long answer to that.
It's brilliant. And, I was thinking about a book written years ago called, I think it was called The Other Guy Blinked. I think it was the Pepsi Coke thing. To your point, I mean, again, if you're a business owner, you have to consider that you have competitors, and it is an evolving process of being in business. And if you're blink or you're not paying attention to the universe moves, technology moves, competitors come and go. You have to be on your toes all the time. And if
Oh
you're
yeah.
one of those companies that I'm sure you and I have worked with, where the leadership has got the big ego and they refuse to acknowledge the fact that time moves, right? They
Yeah.
fall behind and then they stop pointing fingers at everybody. So, what does it say on your black band? Something fight on your right
Shannon's
arm?
fight.
What is that? Shannon?
Shannon's fight.
Shannon's fight. So I wanted to talk to you about this because I think that the mark of anybody that I've ever been in contact with who's entrepreneur, business owner, who are ones that are successful and they also give of their time and themselves for other causes. So talk about Shannon's fight. How'd you get into it? What does it do?
Yeah, Shannon's fight was the impetus to everything changing in my life through the toughest time in my life. I'll give you the short of a version as I can give you, but through the toughest time in my life, there was a situation that arose with a classmate at the martial arts school that I was attending as a hobby, a 15-year-old girl, and we found out that she had been diagnosed with this rare form of childhood cancer. She had like paralysis in her arm and then surgery, and then she couldn't walk anymore. And it was a whole thing. And something just called out to me during the time. This was when I was still in the pharmacy industry that I had to help. So I rallied the troops, a few of the people that have become my closest friends from that martial arts school. And we decided to put together a fundraiser, to benefit Shannon and kids like Shannon. And the idea turned into a full blown nonprofit. And, we filed for our 501c3 that year. We had a really successful first fundraiser, and it brought me family that I didn't even expect at that time. Got closer with all the people that were involved in that situation, got close with Shannon's family throughout that process. And, unfortunately, a couple of years later, we lost Shannon, but we kept the mission going. And that particular situation, everything surrounding it brought me a lot more than I expected in my life, because I during that process, becoming very close to Shannon's family, wound up getting very close to one of her sisters, and she's now my wife. So, 6 years ago we got married, and
Wow.
kind of changed my life. And yeah, and so that was my first foray into the nonprofit world, and I made sure, because of the impact it had in my life, that I would always make the nonprofit world a big part of what I do and who I am. And so since then, I have a very close relationship with the Ronald McDonald House, Long Island Coalition Against Bullying, a whole bunch of nonprofits that I do a lot of work with, whether it's pro bono work, volunteer work, whatever. I'm on the Speakers Bureau for the Ronald McDonald House, and I'm an ambassador for the house. So yeah, it's become a huge part of my life. Shannon's fight has begun to really sunset over the last couple of years. We did our important work over the first 5, 6, 7 years of its existence, and since then we've just been disseminating the funds and helping other nonprofits and families.
Mm.
We're fully out of funds, and that's it. But this will always be on my wrist as a reminder of the thing that changed my life and the person that changed my life.
That's amazing. My wife always says things happen for a reason. The wife story was just amazing. It's like
Yeah.
a bonus for the podcast. So, two quick questions, George. One is, who is the person that influenced you the most in your life?
I'm probably going to say I'm what's four people now, but I'm gonna combine them into one. Probably my kids, in all different ways. I have four kids now. My two big ones, who were the ones I already had when I was going through my divorce, they were my North Star during that process when I had to rediscover, who George is and the man that I wanted to be. And they kind of led me through that process to find that guy again, and they became the basis of everything I do. And then then you get remarried, and you never thought you'd have more kids, and all of a sudden these other two kids come along that change your life, and you just keep evolving into, I think, better and better man because of what they teach you. You know what I mean? So all four of them, in a way, have shaped my life in a way that I could have never imagined.
So I meant to say happy belated birthday. Your birthday was on 5th of December, right? Is that right?
Yes, yes, thank you so much.
And
Yep,
uh, and I would say the next day, I'm proud new grandpa, first time. Uh,
congrats.
so Alina Bell was born on the 6th. So last question. We're both New Yorkers. I give you a giant billboard in Times Square. What does George put on there for everybody to see?
That's a good one.
Yeah, content, something you would write for people to read.
Yeah, I think a message more so than anything to kind of bring people together. There's a Greek word that has always the last few years has popped out of me because of all the things that I do and how I've evolved over my personal life and my career. But there's a Greek word, the word is mazi, and it means together, right? That word, I don't know, has stuck out in so many different ways over the last few years, and it's the theme of kind of what I've tried to do in all parts of my life, right? To work together with people towards whatever the goal is. I took over this year. I've been volunteering for over 10 years in our local police activity league, as a basketball coach and director of basketball. I took over as commissioner of basketball this year. And, we themed our season this year together. That's the theme for it, because we're all trying to build something together. So that's probably what I would put up there. That word, mazi.
And and that's a fitting ending to an entrepreneurship podcast because we know, because we work with them, that companies don't succeed or fail based on the founder. It's about the togetherness of a team and the ethos, as you mentioned. For me, the corporate culture, ethos, all play a role, but everybody has to be on the same page for that to happen. Right. And so perfect ending. Love the story by your wife. I wasn't expecting that. And so congratulations. Happy belated birthday. For anybody who wants to connect with George and check Speak as a speaking platform, everything will be in show notes. Thank you again for doing this. It was fun.
Thank you, Zev. Appreciate it, buddy.
My pleasure. Take care.